And here we go. Thank you for joining us today to discuss this very important research. My name is Terry Maxwell, and for over 15 years now, I've built a portfolio of conscious companies, a whole portfolio of them. And I've studied conscious business trends, and I've released several of these conscious business forecasts. I believe this is the most important because we're in a very important pivotal change with the recent political changes and their impact on global business. Like you, I've been struggling to make sense of it. So I dug even deeper into the data to understand what the future of conscious business holds. I'm going to share a summary of that research today, and the full report will be coming out in May. In addition to starting a portfolio of conscious brands, several of my clients asked me to create ShiftCo. ShiftCo exists to train conscious leaders how to grow their business and maximize their impact. At the end of last year, 85.7% of the founders using our platform had doubled their business. And my belief is when you double your business, you triple your impact. So what led me to do this work is very germane to the forecast. So in addition to being president of an internet subsidiary whose parent went public on the NASDAQ stock exchange way back in 1999, I've had multiple business exits. And I come back to that internet startup in a minute because it's very important to what's occurring today. It's hard to believe that there's a lesson from 1999 that we can use today, but it is very important. In 2009, I sold my last business and I started over with this crazy idea that there had to be a way to do good and make money. So I created Share on Purpose Inc. It's kind of like a purposeful Shark Tank. And we do two things. One, we have a speculator fund that invests in purposeful brands. This is an example of one of our investments. It's called Your Izzy. It's the first zero waste makeup. And there's also a skincare line, 100% recyclable, beautiful product, amazing. That's an example of the investments that we would make. We also have what we call the Cultivator. The Cultivator creates conscious companies with disruptive business models. To date, we've created 5 companies. ShiftCo's number 5. It rounds out the portfolio. And we've got several other companies on the drawing board. But I love what I do. I get to grow businesses that make the world better, and I get to support leaders that are making the world better. And so that's the backdrop for how ShiftCo exists and why this research that I'm sharing with you today matters to where we're headed. We're going to cover 3 things. First is probably one of your biggest questions. Will conscious business trends, sustainability, equality, human capital, will they expand or retract? On the surface, it looks like things are going backwards and going in opposite direction, but I'm going to give you a lot of data that's going to refute that. That's not actually what's happening. Second is, okay, if that's not what's happening, Terry, where is all this excessive conflict and drama coming? Things are heating up, and there's a lot of conflict out there. And as you'll see, there's a very good reason for this conflict. And then, of course, at the end, we're going to be talking about what can I do differently now to increase my success. And for the last few months, we've been partnering with several organizations to bring these insights to help you know, to give you ideas and strategies to understand what's happening, but also how you can grow your good and not be distracted by all the noise. So let's start first with understanding what the data is telling us. I want to describe what I call value-based business models, which includes companies who practice conscious capitalism, as well as companies that focus on what's known as stakeholder capitalism, and companies that have adopted a public benefit structure, as well as social impact models. All of those are what I call value-based business models. And I believe that conscious business is a business model as much as it is a movement. Most people see it as a movement. I see it and have always seen it as a business model. It's a different way, it's a different model for doing business. There are 3 characteristics that distinguish values-based business models, such as conscious capitalism. And the last time that I saw this big of a business model shift was way back in 1995, when I left a very secure executive position to chase what I believe was a revolutionary business model shift the internet. Again, I'm older than I look. That was a long time ago. But at the time, believe it or not, people thought the internet was dangerous. They thought it would be harmful to business. And just like today, there was a lot of conflict and cynicism about the internet, which in hindsight seems crazy now. But that's what was happening in 1995. Even in 1995, I could see how the internet would revolutionize the way business was done. I could see that the internet would create an entirely new way to do business, a new business model altogether, e-commerce, which of course it did. And to put that into perspective, today only 45%, less than half of shoppers prefer in-store purchases versus online. That's today, end of 2024, holiday, going into January. I think that number is going to continue to shrink. That doesn't mean that in-person retail is dead. It just means that people prefer to make purchases online. So here we are in 2025. Back in 1995, people thought that the internet was crazy. Why would you do that? It's horrible. Today, billions of people shop online, and it's completely revolutionized the way we think about business. Now, the internet company that I worked for went public on NASDAQ in 1999. And that was the tipping point of the internet's adoption. And I personally rode the wave of early resistance to the internet. And then I saw its rapid adoption. And I saw it, of course, truly transform business models, most of it, of course, for good. The cool thing is, guys, I believe that's where we are with value-based business models. And the research I'm going to show you is going to tell you why I believe that. We are at a conscious business tipping point. And values-based business models can be distinguished by three very important characteristics. The first is how they approach their product. Whereas a traditional business approaches their product by asking, will someone buy it? A conscious company wants to know if it will solve a problem. And I want you to think about that for just a second. When you started your business and you're growing your business, although you want to make money, you are focused on solving a problem. An example of that is the founder of Your Izzy. He wanted to find a way to create a makeup line that wouldn't destroy the planet with plastics and chemicals. And so sitting at his dentist chair, watching his dentist use the different devices that they put in their mouth and watching how they recycled that and realizing there was something about steel that he needed to look into, he invented the first zero waste makeup line using steel to bring high quality makeup to consumers. He wasn't innovating to make money. He was looking for a way to solve the personal care product waste that destroys the environment. A second characteristic of a values-based business model is pricing. A traditional business approaches pricing from the standpoint of what will someone pay, whereas a conscious business asks, how much is this worth? Choosing first to focus on value over greed. Value-based business models price based on value. And this is one of the reasons why conscious brands will excel in this recession that is apparently coming by all estimates. There is a recession looming on the horizon. We will excel because we price based on value. And we remain focused on value. But that is also where some of the conflict is coming from. More on that in a minute. The third characteristic of a values-based business model is how we view success. A traditional business approaches success from how much money can we make, whereas we as conscious founders and conscious leaders, we focus on the worth and the success and the value, always choosing to focus on value over greed. Now, to understand what values-based business models and trends have to do with what's happening right now, I want to take a step back and look at the history of conscious business. For those of you that aren't familiar with conscious capitalism, I'm going to introduce you to a brands that you know that were at the forefront of this movement. From what I can tell, one of the first and most successful conscious brands was Patagonia, which started in 1973. Ben & Jerry's started in 1978, and then Whole Foods in 1980. Then Tom Shoes in 2006. That's when the first get give pricing model took hold, which is a values based pricing model. And when you hear about conscious capitalism and stakeholder capitalism, these are brands that are typically talked about. But there are many others. A brand that I believe is the perfect example of a values based business model is Warby Parker. Warby Parker does eyeglasses, and they innovated a better way and a better product for less money. They created their own conscious business model to make and sell eyeglasses. They make a better product for less money. And then there's Bombas, another social impact brand using the Get Give as its core pricing model. So these are all brands that we've heard of, right? And what you might not realize, though, is today, almost 50% of all companies that are formed are started today using a value-based business model. 50%. They are started to focus simultaneously on purpose and profit, which brings me back to the internet and why there's so much drama and conflict. All trends follow a very predictable pattern. I saw and lived this in 1995 when I first realized the internet would become a revolutionary new way to do business. For me to see the internet as a new disruptive business model meant that there were decades of development in technology and its applications that occurred before I could see it as a consumer. And the same is true for values-based business model. There have been decades of innovators ahead of us in conscious capitalism and B Lab. But I want to show you what I mean by this to show you why we are at the tipping point. When a new trend or business model is introduced, less than 3% adopt it. I remember in 1992 getting the AOL CDs, and I'm turning 60 here at the end of this month, getting the AOL CDs in the mail, for those of you that are near my age, offering this thing called the internet. I signed on, put in that CD, and I was fascinated by it as a consumer. 1992. At the time, all you could do was send emails. I don't even think they called them emails back then, and join chat rooms and search for things. But I started to see businesses offering promotions online via AOL. And then I saw one of the first internet ads, and I was like, wow, this is a game changer because you can reach people in their home at all hours of the day, as opposed to just in the newspaper or magazine or when they turned on the 60 Minutes news. And the corporation I worked for at the time, an educational software company, had started work on an internet-based educational software product. And when they presented it, I was very excited. And when they presented their first product, but they started talking about the fact that they were over a decade behind all of our competitors in leveraging the internet. They were a decade behind. And that's when I was like, wow, this is a game changer. So not wanting to miss this trend, I left this very secure position and went to work for an internet startup in 1995. Well, today I see the exact same thing for values-based business models. These are revolutionary shifts, and I'm going to share the data with you to show you why I'm so bullish on this. Now, between 1970 and 2020, that was the introduction phase of conscious and values-based business models. So basically, over a 50-year period, there's been innovation around conscious business models. The second phase is growth. That's when a major trend starts to take hold and things really start to heat up. Typically, there's about a 14% adoption rate during this phase, and that phase is when the majority of true innovation occurs. For conscious and values-based business models, that seemed to start around the time of the pandemic in 2021. In a minute, I'm going to show you the data that supports that assumption. The third phase is maturity. And that's when the rest of the world adapts and things start to change. This is typically when you see a greater than 60% adoption rate. And the final phase is decline, which is typically characterized by the replacement of whatever a trend is. And I think for internet technology, we're seeing that right now, and AI is replacing the way we do business via the internet. But let's go back to the period for where we are with conscious and values-based business model. That little red box is a very important box because it's known as the chasm. And in the chasm is when you see the most resistance to a trend. I'll talk more about that in a minute because it's the chasm that explains why there's so much drama and conflict occurring right now. For a trend to revolutionize an industry, three things must simultaneously exist, and they are known as convergence. First, entrepreneurs and businesses must accept the trend. That's because the majority of innovation occurs through entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial businesses. And that's when the majority of the innovation really makes sure a trend becomes a reality. Second, consumer behavior must change because consumers power the economic influence of a trend. If there's not an economic influence of a trend will die. When consumers get behind a trend, it usually starts to hit the growth phase, and that's when you see adoption start to go up significantly. Third is technology and support systems must adapt to provide a foundation for the trend to scale beyond those early adopters. I want to look at these three elements that are converging right now around conscious and values-based business models, starting first with entrepreneurship and business. This will set the stage to explain why there's so much conflict right now at this very moment, because we're in the chasm from the old way of doing business, which is based on greed, to new values-based business models. And basically, guys, the old way of doing business doesn't want the values-based business models to succeed. But I'll come back to that. I want to give you a first stat. This is from Global Entrepreneurship Monitor's 2024 study. Global Entrepreneurship Monitor is the world's foremost study of entrepreneurship, and they've been doing this since 1999. I've been following them for the last decade or so, and they measure a lot of things: gender, race, age, how different countries support entrepreneurs. It's a global study. It's fascinating. But one of the things they started measuring in 2019 was a founder's motivation for starting their business. The blue line represents that the reason for someone starting a business is to make a difference. The orange line represents, I want to make a lot of money or build great wealth. Right now, almost 50% of US and Canadian founders reported that their motivation for starting their business was for the primary purpose of making a difference in the world, in addition to earning good income. They're not mutually exclusive. Think about that. 50%. 1 out of 2 businesses today are started to make a difference. And the majority of other countries are seeing the same shift. It's not just North America. Part of this is happening because the next generation of business owners, millennials, are very eco-conscious. But I want to share more examples beyond just the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor's report. This is a survey from CEO Today magazine, which said sustainability and ethical business practices are a top 10 business trend. Fast Companies said there's a growing trend of eco-conscious branding. Businesses must authentically align with sustainability. Now, this is in the heat of last year's US election, guys. These reports were coming out at the end of 2024. Fast Company said that eco-conscious branding has evolved from a trend to a core value. Another data point is Inc. magazine, which said sustainable development and moral business practices are a top 5 business trend. And then PricewaterhouseCoopers said that consumers are willing to pay almost a 10% sustainability premium, even as the cost of living and inflationary concerns continue to arise. This is from their 2024 Voice of the Consumer survey. I want to look at some other consumer trends because this is another area of convergence. So the first area is business and entrepreneurs because they power innovation. Consumers have to accept the trend for it to become mainstream. And remember those AOL CDs I referenced? So when my neighbors and friends started asking me for my AOL address, now known as an email address, I knew consumer adoption had taken root. So let's see where consumer behavior as it relates to conscious and value-based business models stands. Looking at conscious consumers, this is from TD Bank's annual consumer spending index. And they look at what percent of shoppers consider and call themselves conscious. 58% of their annual consumer spending study said that was important. And it was even more prevalent along millennials. 92% of millennials said they were conscious and where they shopped and the products they buy mattered, and that they were prioritizing local, sustainable, and ethically sourced products. My nieces and nephews that are millennials live and die this. They don't just buy something that's on sale. They do the research about the company. They do the research on the sourcing. 62% of the millennial generation, which will power the economy in the next decade, 62% of them are aware and are making conscious decisions when purchasing products. This is another study that I've been following for the last 11 years, and it's from Good Must Grow. One of the core components of this study is what he calls the Conscious Consumer Spending Index. This index summarizes the importance that consumers place on purchasing from socially responsible companies. And you can see it was already on a good trend. And then we saw a dip, of course, during COVID. And then it spiked back up. And then it leveled off again. And it spiked up again in 2023. And it's down just a little bit in large part because inflation has been sustained for so long. But I prefer to look at data not just annually, but over a 5-year period to see if a trend is really holding. And 3 of the last 4 years, their study showed it was also above 50%, completely validating the TD Bank study. And that means that more than 50% of consumers are making decisions, even when it costs them a little bit more to purchase conscious products. Another segment from the Good Must Grow study is earth-friendly practices, which have held steady. And so they look at whether or not people are purchasing green, and you can see the green line. They look at whether or not people are reducing their consumption in some way. That's the purple line. You can see that earth-friendly practices are also holding steady in spite of the pressure that we felt on our wallet with inflation. The third area that must converge for a trend to become mainstream is technology and support systems. For a trend to be sustained, technology and innovation must support and enable its expansion so that it can become mainstream. Seems obvious, right? So when a trend is gaining ground, technology will adapt and will significantly increase the speed of innovation and also adoption. That's why in the first phase of adoption, it's only 3%. It takes a long time. And then it speeds up in the second, it goes from 3% to 14%, and then it spikes way up. Technology adds efficiency, speed, knowledge, access, the ability to analyze data and collaboration. AI is a great example of that, although it's a little too early to see how it will affect business. But I'll share some more tips on how to think about that when we get to that part of the forecast. And unlike when I started my conscious business journey back in 2009, today, there are incredible support systems for conscious founders to help them shape their values-based business model. I became aware of conscious capitalism in 2010 when a former client and very good friend, Carrie Freeman Parsons, told me about it. As you know, conscious capitalism is focused on reshaping their perception of capitalism. If you're not involved in your local conscious capitalism chapter, I encourage you to do that. It's an incredibly rewarding experience. And there's also B-Lab. In B-Lab, they are focused on the certification of conscious brands, and they created what's called the B-Impact Assessment to help companies measure and improve the way they adhere to values-based business models, or what they call stakeholder capitalism. And of course, SchiffCo, which is focused on growing conscious companies. Our belief is we want to prove that conscious and values-based business models are more profitable, more scalable, and more sustainable. And the way that we do that is to ensure that all conscious brands are thriving and making a bigger impact. And our motto is, when you double a conscious business, you triple its impact. But it's not just the 3 of us. Today, there are thousands of tools, systems, groups, communities supporting conscious and eco-friendly businesses. So as you can see, entrepreneurs and businesses have adopted values-based business models. Consumers have adopted purchasing habits. And there's now technological and support systems for a new way of doing business to make this business model become prevalent. Which brings me back to why there is so much conflict in the world. The data clearly supports that conscious business trends, sustainability, equality, human capital, have and will continue to expand, which begs the question, then why is there so much conflict? It's all because of that thing that I talked about called the chasm. Let me show you what I mean by that. All meaningful change is preceded by conflict. Now, think about that for just a second, because it's kind of like, of course, all meaningful change is preceded by conflict. As those AOL CDs were gaining ground and blanketing neighborhoods with household incomes above a certain amount, government started fighting over how the internet would be regulated. Secular and religious groups started attacking the internet, saying it would become the death of our society. If you're older like me, you'll remember that. I remember being in my church, and I remember the pastor smashing an AOL CD saying that this is the devil, this is horrible, you can't do this. This was like 1993. One of my favorite quotes was John Danforth. He was nominated under George W. Bush as the 4th US ambassador to the United Nations. And I remember hearing him speak at a conference where we were discussing internet-based commerce models. And I am reminded of his talk. He said, the loudest voices we hear are those that advocate conflict and divisiveness. Boy, doesn't that ring true today. So what is this conflict about? It's about change. All meaningful change is preceded by conflict. What's happening right now is that more businesses are being created to make a difference, and more businesses are leveraging values-based business models. They are focused on making a difference as well as making money. More consumers are choosing to support eco-friendly, sustainable, diverse, and equity-focused practices, and frankly, moral business practices. And the old way of doing business, like this. The old way of doing business, greed, shareholder focus, doesn't like that we've been gaining ground now for the last 2 decades. You see, when businesses start to think differently about human capital and how people are treated, it threatens the old way of doing business. When businesses prioritize a values-based approach, threatens the old shareholder-driven mode of profit at all costs. Just look at the layoffs that are being normalized while corporate profits have been at record highs. The old way of doing business wants to let businesses prioritize profits. They want businesses to be unregulated and unchecked. The old way of doing business, the almost authoritarian way of doing business, doesn't like stakeholder capitalism. It doesn't like conscious capitalism values. It doesn't want us prioritizing people alongside profits. And it sure doesn't want us prioritizing the planet alongside the kind of greed that destroys the planet. What we are experiencing is called the chasm. And the best part is it shows up right before a new trend gains ground. I saw this in 1995 and 1996 as people were at the height of resisting the internet. And just a few years later, 1998, 1999, it was clear that the change had crossed the chasm and we would never go back. Between 1995 and 1999, the voices got really loud, and then it wasn't sustainable and they crumbled. By 1999, we were not turning back. So what we're experiencing with the conflict and drama today is in large part resistance to not just a different business model, but a better business model, one that balances people, planet, purpose, and profit, one that values diversity, inclusion, and belonging, one that understands the value of stakeholders and the value of impact, and sees businesses as a force for good rather than a race towards greed. The conflict and drama, folks, it's loud, but it is not real. The conflict tells me that things are working, even though it's hard. And there's even more data that tells a much different story. Let's start with McKinsey's D&I Global Market Report. This is from the end of last year. At the time, 67% of companies had targeted talent programs for diverse talent. 70% had supplier diversity programs. But get this, McKinsey found that organizations, and McKinsey is one of the most well-known, reliable sources of research. They found that organizations in the top quartile for gender diversity had a 25% likelihood of financially outperforming their peers. So that means if my company values gender diversity, I have a 25% likelihood of doing better financially than my peers. Organizations in the top quartile for ethnic diversity have a 36% likelihood of financial outperformance. Diverse companies earn 2.5 times higher cash flow per employee. And cash is king. Diverse companies earn more cash. They're more profitable, more successful, and more cash forward. The best part is inclusive teams are 35% more productive. And diverse teams, McKinsey found, made better decisions 87% of the time. Do you think the old way of doing business likes this kind of proof? Of course not. So the attack on DEI that we've all seen is as much about greed and control as it is about racism and gender parity. Let me say that again. The attack on DEI is as much about greed and control as it is about racism and gender parity. This conflict and drama is loud. It is not real. But there's another piece of very important data that explains why this conflict is so visceral. Trust is at an all-time low. Very important study to frame how you lead your business going forward. It's from a global organization called OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And it's tracked trust for a long time, trust in government leaders, business leaders, and trust in the media. Basically, trust is at an all-time low, and you don't need a piece of data to tell you that. But I want you to pay attention to what they found. This is the track from 2021 to 2025. The question they asked as they were tracking this is the fear that you have of whether or not leaders were lying. They looked at government, they looked at business, they looked at journalists and reporters. Look at the jump in 2025 for government leaders and business leaders and journalists and reporters. The vast majority of people think that we're being lied to. But I want to particularly highlight us, business leaders, because this report says the vast majority of people out there, and this was a global study, believe that the majority of business leaders are purposely misleading people, and they're doing it intentionally. And it's a scary metric. The vast majority of people globally think that business leaders are purposely misleading people, and that purposely word means that they're doing it intentionally and they're doing it egregiously. And that is sad. But it's also why our work matters. We have the opportunity to change this, and we can differentiate our business on trust. So if you want to grow your business, it's real simple. Be even more trustworthy. Now, there's another facet of trust that explains why the conflict has really gotten bad of late and why it's become almost unsustainable. This is from a systemic study from Our World in Data, and it's tracked the decline in trust since 1972. What's interesting is when you look at one of the more recent studies that shows trust by countries, the US has a 37% trust rating versus Denmark, which is the highest at 74%. And there's a consequence to trust. This is from the Edelman Trust Barometer, which indicates that with the amount of distrust, it is now transformed into grievance. Grievance is when people have an axe to grind. They're mad, they're angry, they're raging on social media, they're putting in negative reviews, they're fighting back. 61% of respondents said they have a moderate or higher sense of not just trust issues, but grievance more so than they did a year ago. And Edelman found that grievance culturally creates more distrust. So they call it the trust penalty, that mistrust leads to grievance and grievance leads to more distrust. And this penalty means that our society is normalizing aggressive action. And we can see this everywhere. A current example of it is the Tesla backlash. But I want to isolate us for a second. Businesses scored 42% on high grievance. Customers, employees, vendors, and everyday people don't trust us. And that mistrust has transformed into grievance, which is creating more mistrust. There have been high-profile media cases that have showcased these challenges. And what Edelman said is this crisis of grievance is putting pressure on trust, meaning it's likely to get worse before it gets better. Here's the good news. It creates a fundamentally huge opportunity for us as conscious business leaders to step up our game. Rather than looking at the world as a dumpster fire, let's look at it from the lens of being the change we want to see. Which brings me to the reason that you're here today. Now, this presentation is just a sampling and summary of the data contained in a much larger conscious business forecast that will come out next month. It certainly explains why there's so much conflict and drama, but it boils down to the reality that values-based business models have and will grow in popularity. More importantly, they are a better way to do business. And do not forget, the old way of doing business is fighting like crazy to stop its ultimate adoption. And it will prevail. We will prevail, which leads me to the most important part of this presentation. What can we do differently now to increase success? Better yet, this is the best part. How do you take advantage of these trends? How do you use business as a force for good to push us past the chasm through the growth phase and into full-scale adoption of values-based business models? That's my prediction. By 2030, we will be in a full-scale adoption of values-based business models. And we have 5 years to take advantage of this trust issue, to take advantage of values-based pricing models, and ultimately win this game. To do that, there are 5 things that we can do right now, not just to survive this chaotic world, but to grow, to thrive, and to advance the power of conscious businesses. The first is double down on doing good. Don't run scared, double down on doing good. The second is remember you get what you focus on. I'm going to go into deeper areas of each of these. Third is grow your good. I'm going to talk about how to do that. Fourth is choose your battles. And then fifth is get clear and calm every day, because this is going to be a marathon in the next 5 years. But let's start with doubling down on doing good. If you're listening to this presentation, you're already committed to using your business to make an impact and to build something that's profitable, to build something that also makes the world better. I don't need to convince you of that. What I want to encourage you to do is double down on it. The world needs us right now, and I am confident, not just 90% confident, I am 100% confident that conscious business models and conscious business-based innovation will be the driving force of positive change. Not the government, not a nonprofit sector. Conscious business models will drive positive change. The data overwhelmingly supports that this way of doing business is better for people, for planet, for profit. Remember that McKinsey study, for success, and for society as a whole. So trust is low, right? Use it to your advantage. Here are some ways that you can double down on doing good. Offer guarantees. Use low risk pricing or performance models. A clear outward sign of a values-based business model is they offer a guarantee, or they offer low risk pricing, which means you don't have to pay for everything up front, or they offer some type of a performance model. Remember that. Really rethink the aspects of your business model and try to say, how do I build a business and pricing model that lowers risk? Second is focus on value and building relationships. Focus your marketing not on getting people to buy ClickFunnels and lead magnets, but on serving people until they're ready to buy. This isn't about giving away things for free, but rather approaching how you market to emphasize the relationship. Speak more about the problems you solve and the value you provide rather than what you do. And that's a really important thing. We have a training session called Ditch the Pitch on our YouTube page that shows you how to do that. You want to speak about the problems you solve and the value you provide rather than what you do and your title and those kinds of things. Third is showcase authentic reviews. This is really important right now because of fake news and fake reviews. For example, whenever I see a business marketing something that sounds too good to be true, I go over to Trustpilot and I check them out. You probably do it too. Most of the time, the reviews are horrible on Trustpilot. So consider how you can make your reviews authentic, even if they're not all 5 stars. Allow people to basically give you real feedback and respond to that real feedback. No judgment. We're not perfect. The beautiful thing about conscious businesses, and I want you to hear me on this, every conscious business is always in the process of getting better. Every conscious business is always in the process of getting better. So showcase those things. And then also modify your business model to build trust. Rethink your company's values. Publish an annual or biannual impact report. Donate to nonprofits who are going to be hurt in this economic backlash. Think about ways that you can collaborate with your clients, not just sell to them. An example of this is I wake up every day and I ask one question: who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? And that's how I make most of the changes in my business. Who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? Who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? And if you do that one thing, you will see your business flourish. It's always worked for me in the last 15 years as a conscious founder. The next thing is you get what you focus on. This was a lesson I learned from my grandfather, and I don't have time to tell you the story. It's a beautiful story, but to grow a conscious company that makes an impact, you can and must, and I mean must, learn how to focus differently. It's a skill you can learn. It's not necessarily something we're born with. And it's a skill that's paramount in these times. Don't focus on the noise. Remember, it's loud, it's not true. It's loud, it's not true. Be very selective with what you read and what you watch. Focus on what inspires you to move forward. One of my mantras right now is to find the light and amplify it. It's easy to share negativity. It's easy to shout about the chaos, but there are a lot of good things that are happening. Remain hyper vigilant and focus on what is working. Focus on the people and companies doing good and amplify their work. Get to know the other people that are on this webcast with us today. They're doing great things. Amplify their work. And finally, this idea that every conscious business is in the process of getting better. Don't worry about perfection. Just focus on incremental improvement, which leads me to the third strategy: grow your good. My research has demonstrated when a conscious business doubles in size, they triple their impact. Think about the power of that. Here are some ways to double your business and grow your good. First, and most importantly, you need to 3x the awareness of your business. 3 times more of your potential buyers need to be aware that you exist. Most conscious founders, or what we call difference makers, are humble. They're focused on taking care of their customers, and they don't spend enough time ensuring their target market knows about their good work. That's got to change. All businesses need 3 times more awareness than they have today. Grow brand awareness and talk about the good you're doing. If you do that, you'll grow your good. Double your partners and collaborators. Don't worry about competition. Look for ways that you can collaborate. Look for people who want to collaborate with you. We're stronger together. Find others who believe and look for win-win partners where you can grow together. And as I mentioned before, tell stories about the impact you're making. The world needs this. And it creates a positive energy cycle around your business that will help you grow its size and, more importantly, its impact, but it also neutralizes the negativity. Which brings me to strategy 4. Choose your battles carefully. With all of the negativity, some people and organizations want you to fight their battles for them. If you care about sustainability, fight that battle and leave the others. If it's diversity that you're passionate about, fight that battle. Don't feel like you have to fight all of the battles. There are just too many right now. It's important for you to choose your battles carefully because we must conserve our personal energy. I care about a lot of those things, but right now, the battle that I've chosen is conscious business over the old way of doing business, and all of my energy is going into that. When I first became an entrepreneur in 2002, I failed miserably for 2 years. I was ready to quit, and I decided to hire a coach, and she gave me a powerful assignment. She asked me to interview 10 founders and to find out what they had in common. And I did that. And guess what I found? Only one thing they had in common was perseverance. They refused to quit. So I decided, okay, maybe I won't quit, but I think I need some more people. And I interviewed another 90 founders over the next month for a total of 100 founders. Cold call them, because this was 2002. Cold call them and said, hey, Jim, I want to ask you some questions about your business. 100%, they only had one thing in common. They refused to quit. So we have that in common. We refuse to quit because we know the work that we do matters. So choose your battle and save some energy for perseverance, which brings me to the last strategy. My most important tip is to get clear and calm every single day. It's one thing I know for sure. It's authenticity will win. To be authentic, we have to be clear and calm in these rocky times. We can't be reacting. We can't be fearful. Block time on your calendar to breathe or meditate or go for a calming walk. I have 2 blocks on my calendar every day, 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon. I turn my email off. I turn my computer off. I've got a practice that I do 30 minutes in the morning, 30 minutes in the afternoon. I need that time. Your breath is one of the most powerful tools you have. Take time to breathe, find techniques that help you relax and quiet your mind. We are in for the greatest opportunity of conscious business in our lifetime, the next 5 years. And I believe probably starting the second half of this year and even the next year. It is the greatest opportunity for conscious businesses in our lifetime. And when your mind is quiet and you stop the noise and you stop the fear, ask yourself that question: who do I serve and what do they need from me right now? That question will lead you to better ways to serve customers. It will lead you to better ways to talk about what it is that you're doing. It will improve your business model as long as your mind is quiet. Thank you so much for joining me for the summary of the Conscious Business Forecast. I'm going to pause the recording and take a few questions.